It's Thursday. That means we have a conversation with Wyoming Liberty Group. So let's get at it. My name is Glenn Woods. Pretty much everything I talk about and more you can find on my website, which is boldrepublic.com. And this is Glenn. Who's on the phone with me?
This is Bruce Walker.
Okay, good. I was waiting for the video stream to come in, which usually does.
Well, I had a hot date with Kathleen Sebelius last night, and the website's down now.
Yeah, and how did that date work out? I bet you didn't get a kiss goodnight.
Well, she
careful.
She promised me one.
Yeah, but I bet you everything crashed before the evening was out.
That is right.
That's about right. Yeah. Okay. That's right. Well, okay. Bruce Walker with Wyoming Liberty Group. You're I understand, the editor there, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Good. One of the reasons I got to compliment you on this that I have Wyoming Liberty Group on every single week is just because of the quality of the articles. Whether you're talking about something regional or local to Wyoming or something national, I think the content and quality is just absolutely outstanding. Which is why I turn to you guys for inside information on what's happening, not just in Cheyenne, but what's in the region. So if you're the editor, good job.
Well, I thank you, sir. But, frankly, I have to say that the brains are without and I am only within.
Yeah.
And by comparison, I am but a pair of ragged claws scuttling across ocean floors.
Well put. See, you can tell the guy's a writer. Can you tell he's a writer? Okay, so the note that I got from Maureen, which I'm a big fan of, Maureen said that you have been looking at a book by Russell Kirk. Could you tell us about the book?
Well, yes, this is the 60th anniversary of the publication of The Conservative Mind by Russell Kirk, man from Michigan who became one of the foremost thinkers of conservative thought and philosophy and literature and culture in general. So he's I knew Russell as I was growing up, and still very good friends with his widow, but it seems pertinent to mention his book 60 years after its publication. It was revised along the way, but it's still one of the great books on conservatism. Okay,
now in this book you have 10 conservative principles. Before we get into detail, let's just run down what the 10 principles are.
Okay, very quickly. First, the conservative believes that there exists an enduring moral order. Second, a conservative adheres to custom, convention, and continuity. And I might want to point out right here that conservative as a noun is not really accurate, but
right.
Conservative as an adjective
yes.
makes a lot more sense.
Yes.
Okay, and third, conservatives believe in a principle of prescription. And fourth, conservatives are guided by a principle of prudence. Conservatives pay attention to the principle of variety is number 5. Conservatives are chastened by their principle of imperfectibility is number 6. 7, conservatives are persuaded that freedom and property are closely linked. That's one of my favorites. 8th, conservatives uphold voluntary community, quite as they oppose involuntary collectivism. 9th, the conservative perceives the need for prudent restraints upon power and upon human passions. And finally, 10, the thinking conservative understands that permanence and change must be recognized and reconciled in any vigorous society.
Well, and a lot of this, you hit on in the last couple of years, the word thinking would involve people who are actually thinking people, because some of these principles, a lot of these principles, take some thought. You have to sit down and consider these things. So let me attack the first one, which when you talk about the moral standard, and there would be a lot of disagreement among the conservative community as to where that morality comes from. So what's the principle written by Russell Kirk?
Well, okay, to repeat the principle, understand when he wrote The Conservative Mind and published it in 1953, there were 6 canons that he subsequently revised for later publications of The Conservative Mind. But for his final book, The Politics of Prudence, in 1993, he made it 10 because he broke it down and expounded upon it just a little bit more. So the conservative believes that there exists an enduring moral order. That order is made from man, and man is made for it. So human nature is a constant. we're pretty much the same type of individuals that we were 100 years, 200 years ago, 500 years ago. And moral truths are permanent. Glenn Woods is a wonderful man, and I would be in violation of the moral order if I were to come over there and hit you with a book by Russell Kirk. You wouldn't like that, and everyone would look at us as would look at me as being in violation of said moral order. So
well, and that goes
there are permanent truths.
Sure, there goes back to one of my favorite lines and I don't remember who said this, but your rights end when your fist touches my nose.
That is correct.
Yeah, okay. Now, well, and the reason I bring this up is because there are those who get into the argument that moral principles or our rights, for that matter, will descend from God, and other people will say, well, not necessarily, because they may be, conservative thinkers, but they're atheists. And I look at that argument as, well, to me, really, it's neither here nor there. We're talking about the principles of violating somebody else's rights.
Glenn, that's absolutely a great way to put it. Kirk would have said that the word moral order actually signifies harmony, and that there are two aspects or types of this order, and one is the inner order of the soul and the outer order of the commonwealth or the community. So, Plato taught the doctrine, and we know that Plato wasn't a Christian, so you can circumvent the whole religious aspect of discussing morality as either Judeo-Christian or some other faith-based system, and say that it's just living harmoniously with one another. We know that there is a social contract where certain things are acceptable and certain things are unacceptable. So in the 21st century, there has been the consequence of faith kind of falling by the wayside. One of Kirk's friends was T.S. Eliot, who wrote The Wasteland, and a lot of that is concerned with how faith has been relegated to the background of what we do in terms of our human interactions and what we do in terms of our political interactions. So the ruin of great nations in the past century shows that we have fallen into a pit, and that societies fall into when they mistake clever self-interest or ingenious social controls, as in the USSR, for pleasing alternatives to an old-fangled moral order. So if you put the old moral order aside, chaos is what's going to result.
Right. Well, I'm talking with Bruce Walker. He's from Wyoming Liberty Group. We're discussing the book by Russell Kirk and 10 Conservative Principles in those book. Let's go. We could spend a whole hour on just this number one, but let's get on to number two.
Okay. The second conservative adheres to custom, convention, and continuity. It is old custom that enables people to live together peaceably, and the destroyers of custom demolish more than they know or desire. Mm-hmm. So you've heard the phrase, throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Right, yeah.
Or the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. So both of these apply to the second conservative principle. Necessary change, conservatives argues, ought to be gradual and discriminatory.
Right, okay, because you got to change generations of culture often if you want to have a necessary change. People get into their old habits. So, all right, let's move on to number three. Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Well, just as an addendum to that, I mean, yeah. I'm a student of literature, and if we had totally gone to the type of world that, say, the beat writers wanted, we would all be sitting around doing nothing but listening to jazz, drinking cheap wine, and driving back and forth across the country.
And nobody would be producing anything, so where are you going to get the wine from?
Well, you could be producing bad literature.
Yeah.
So that's just my personal belief.
Right, okay.
Okay, the third principle, Glenn, is the principle of prescription. And to define that a little bit, it means that modern people basically stand on the shoulders of the giants that preceded them. Mm-hmm. We're able to see much farther than our ancestors, not only because of the great statures of those who have preceded us, but also that the things that are established by immemorial usage, the mind of man runneth not to the contrary, as Kirk said. There exists rights of which the chief sanction is their antiquity, including, thank you, Edmund Burke, the rights to property. And again, to go back to the first principle, morals are very prescriptive in great part. They're prescriptive in that they keep us from doing bad things to each other. So as Kirk said, conservatives argue that we are unlikely to make any brave new discoveries in morals or politics or taste. And remember that he wrote this, most of this 60 years ago, revised it 20 years ago, and that was when the historian said that we had reached the end of history when the USSR collapsed. So I think Kirk was kind of prescient when he wrote that.
All right. Well, and we're going to get into a little bit more if we can squeeze all of this in here. But when you mentioned property rights in there, for a while I worked with a group called the Castle Coalition, which fought against eminent domain abuse. But it goes beyond just eminent domain. I mean, I even look at property rights when a city comes along and says you're not allowed to have smoking inside of your restaurant. Well, who owns the restaurant? Who's in charge here? This is where you get into a form of fascism when you have the government show up and telling you what you can and can't do with your own property. You no longer have freedom. You have a violation of people's personal private rights.
Glenn, you are precisely in my wheelhouse right now.
All right.
I was the communications manager for the Property Rights Network at a think tank in Michigan for quite some time, and that was precisely the argument that I made. You could sit around a pub and argue if it's okay, if it's legal to smoke a cigarette inside next to other cigarette smokers, or I myself enjoy a pipe once in a while or a cigar.
Mm-hmm.
And
you and I got to get together because we have a whole cigar smoking group up here.
Oh,
yeah.
Then hang on, I'm on my way. But
yeah. Well, while you're saying this, are you watching on the camera right now?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Well, for those who are watching on the camera right now, this Gurkha that I'm holding up will be my little treat after the program here. So.
Oh, well, fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So we got to get together. Okay. You hit a chord there.
I've got a couple of specialty smokes from with Nicaragua and filler and tobacco. So
really, and one last thing before we get back to the topic: is that cigar bar still open, walking distance from the Capitol, or did that close?
That's closed.
Oh, darn. Well, I was going to suggest that as a place we can go.
But there is a cigar shop here in town.
There is one, a shop, but not a place where you can sit and enjoy. And why? Because they took away property rights in Cheyenne, of all places, in a conservative state like Cheyenne. They're not allowing people who own the business to decide whether they want smoking in their own business. It's not up to the business owner anymore, which it should be. Instead, it's up to some group of bureaucrats and a lot of whiners.
Yes.
Okay. So you hit a chord there. Okay. Next one on your list.
Okay. The conservatives are guided by their principle of prudence. And prudence is basically you want to, it's a virtue of someone who has patience, who looks at the long-range consequences and anticipates unintended consequences for anything that might be utopian in nature, such as, say, the Healthcare Act. It was promised the sun, the moon, and the stars, and those of us who are a little bit more prudent, some would say cynical, others might say, knew that it was going to be a train wreck from the get-go.
Well, yeah, we were looking
what it promised.
Down the road at the consequences, and I put up on Twitter just a couple of days ago that this is actually going right now worse than we predicted it was going to go. But then again, we were looking at the realistic consequences of the actions and not our wishful thinking or the utopia that you were just now mentioning here. I got to put you on hold for just a minute. We got to pay some bills. And we'll try to get through as many of what's left on that list as possible. I am talking with Bruce Walker. He's from Wyoming Liberty Group. Back with him in just a moment. For those watching on camera, this is Bruce from Wyoming Liberty Group, who we have been talking to. And by the way, those of you who are those setting up everything on your end have probably noticed that YouTube and Google, which is owned by Google, has gone through some changes here. So it looks a little different on your end, but actually everything is functioning a whole lot better. And by the way, as soon as you mentioned cigars, so you can go ahead and see it here. This is what I was holding up, which is here. Let me go ahead and get the big camera up there for everybody to see. This will be my treat right after that nice Gurkha there. So you got a favorite name brand?
Beg your pardon?
You got a favorite name brand or a favorite kind of cigar?
Oh, I have many. It changes by the week, depending on
Yeah.
what comes in and who's making what. I love Tatuajes, and that's one of my favorite brands. So anything by them is something that I generally stick to for a while. Get a couple of boxes of that until I run out or give them all away.
Well, next time that I'm down in Cheyenne, which I do a couple of times a year, we'll have to get together and sit down and light up a few and have a nice long conversation. Bruce Walker, editor of Wyoming Liberty Group. So we got about 5 minutes left. Run down your list. What's left for us to look at?
Okay, conservatives pay attention to the principle of variety, affection for proliferating intricacy of long-established social institutions and modes of life, as distinguished from narrowing uniformity and deadening egalitarianism of radical societies.
Okay, so translate that into English for the average person. It's generally misunderstood. Conservatives are thought to be people who only live life in one particular way, and we never think outside of the box. But my answer to that would be, no, just the opposite. The people who want you to live without thinking and never change your ways would be those people who want big government breathing down your neck. Would I be right?
Oh, absolutely. And no uniforms for this guy.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Next one down. That's another one I'd really love to talk about, but we got 4.5 minutes left, so go.
Okay, conservatives are chastened by their principle of imperfectibility. In other words, no utopias on this planet. It's not possible. It's never going to happen. And stop promising that your public policy is going to be the be-all and end-all solution to all of the world's problems. You will never fully eradicate knuckleheads. You will never fully eradicate poverty. These things will always be with us.
Right. So, okay, you can step out and help the needy, but there's always going to be one or two out there who are needy, and by all means help them. But much like the healthcare problems that we're going through right now, you don't need to force everybody in society into a program just because there's a few people out there who are suffering.
Correct. And the seventh principle is going back to what we were discussing before. Freedom and property are closely linked. So we've already discussed the property rights issues there. That's how we got into the cigars. So I think we can skip down to 8, which is conservatives uphold voluntary community and oppose involuntary collectivism.
Right. We can cover so many things with that, but since healthcare is a big issue here, let's get into that one again. Voluntary community means I can go see the doctor that I want to see at the price that he and I negotiate, but you can't force me to buy insurance programs and see the doctor of your choice at your price. That's got to be my decision.
Right. Whenever you bring a third party into a conversation such as that, then all of a sudden your freedoms are being limited, and the freedom of the person that you're negotiating with are limited as well.
Well, and again, what we wind up with is there are people who want you to make the decisions that they think that are best for you. You don't get a chance to make that decision yourself, which means, once again, your freedom has been taken. Are we down to number 9?
Well, I was going to add something to that, Glenn. In my home state of Michigan, someone has just put forth a bill that would allow people, that would actually legalize the scalping of concert tickets. So now if you go to a concert venue and you want to see Bruce Springsteen, but you don't have a ticket, and someone does have a ticket, but they want to make a little bit of money off of it, or if they just want face value of the ticket, there's someone from another town that also wants that ticket, and then you can negotiate the price to what you can afford.
Well, yeah, and I've never seen a problem with that as well. If you got a couple of tickets in your hand and somebody else wants them, and they don't mind paying a little extra money for it, I've never understood why that would be illegal. Two people are agreeing, so...
Well, by law, making it illegal kind of violates the law of supply and demand, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And we're at number 10 right now?
No, we're at 9. The conservative perceives the need for prudent restraints upon power and upon human passions. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. That's why we have the different branches of government. That's why we have different representations. Sometimes it gets a little bit out of balance, a little out of whack. And that's when we need to keep our passions in check as well, saying, okay, my need for social justice does not trump your need for individual freedom.
Okay, now we got 1 minute left, so I'll let you get to number 10. We squirrels them all.
Okay, I'll say that. I'll be Speedy Gonzales here, Glenn.
Yeah.
The thinking conservative understands that permanence and change happen, and they must be recognized and reconciled in a vigorous society. So if you adhere to the first 9 principles in application to the 10th principle, things should be pretty well acceptable. Again, it will never be perfect, but it'll be a far better than again throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Right. Okay. Bruce Walker from Wyoming Liberty Group. We do have to get together and talk more about this because I think it's an interesting discussion, but I'm coming up on a hard break, so I got to let you go. Thanks for
Okay.
really
Nice talking to you, Glenn.
Thanks for logging in.
You bet.